And our next two speakers come from a pair of private coaching providers. Both of their organisations are members of Compass, the umbrella body. And we're going to hear from them as a bit of a double act. We'll hear first from Graham Morgan, former footballer, and indeed Andy Heald too, another former footballer, both of whom via circuitous routes found themselves in the positions that they're in. Graham via a time with, both with football and then with Adidas, and Andy through a sports development route. And just a reminder, if you are asking questions in the body of the talk, could you raise your voices, please, for the benefit of the viewers at home, if we don't have time to get the mics round to you. And perhaps if that does happen, if you repeat the question, then that'll give people at home a better chance of hearing the question as well as the answer. So, Graham and Andy, thank you.
Right, good afternoon. I don't know if it was planned that way, but having Paul on before me really suits me to the ground. I'm speaking today on behalf of Compass, which is a relatively new association for external providers of services to schools, not just limited to private providers, external providers. And what's interesting there is that I'm actually their health lead. So the follow-on is very relevant. I want to put into context my views, not just because it gives me a chance to talk about my favourite subject, which is me, but to let you know where I come from. I was an international schoolboy footballer who wasn't interested in academics one bit, but that changed when I broke my leg a week after playing for England. And my master plan of being a professional footballer and ignoring all my academic work went up in flames. Luckily, I managed to get to Borough Road, a college that used to beat the pants out of Carnegie on a regular basis back in the 70s, and Loughborough for that matter, football. And I came into a graduate degree, and then I worked for one of the most magnificent PE teachers you could ever wish to, who completely shaped my outlook on how you try and engage with children, every child in the class. From there, I got into coaching early to compensate for not being able to play, so I crossed from the touchline the other way from the earlier speech, and got my full badge at the age of 24 and was on the staff for the FA delivering them at the age of 25. Ridiculously early, but things were very sensible in those days. That led me to becoming a football development officer, the first one ever in the UK in Bradford, which led me to go to Adidas and influence their approach to grassroots sports marketing. I signed an unknown blonde boy to work with to get the Predator shoe made famous, and I went to work for Adidas in Germany. Came back to be head of sport, and then I had my own company concentrating on grassroots and school sport, and more recently a social enterprise and a charity. I am one of the oldest in the room, but I bring a whole range of experience to what we're going to talk about. I'm not always politically correct, so if I do stray, please accept it as old age. Growing up in the digital age for children, I think, is possibly one of the worst times it could ever happen in the history of mankind. I know we could add war in there and famine, but in the UK, we've got an education programme that's very academic focused. We've got the health challenges that Paul has just described to you, that is going to really threaten the lives of all children. A lot of them can't communicate other than with a gadget in their hand. Face-to-face communication is getting harder. Their personal development, for various reasons, suffers. Disengagement has become very popular. Everyone goes on about the unemployment of young people as well. If you want to throw in suicide as the third most common cause of death for the 15 to 34-year-old age group, we are breeding despair amongst our children. In particular, the words that keep coming through are they feel disengaged, they are inactive, increasingly, and they feel helpless. There are just some of the children we see today. Their lives from a health point of view are being damaged. And equally important, all that fantastic potential they had when they were born is unfulfilled for far too many of them. Now, to try to turn that round, I think everybody in this room, from a health point of view, and it really builds on what you just said, Paul, in terms of improving their health, we could all unite in putting our hands up and saying we have failed in that area. Because children are more and more inactive, more and more obese, more and more disengaged, for whatever reason. This is one of our diagrams, Paul, I hope you like this one. By 2050, 90% of today's children will be obese or overweight. So all the little kids we see on the park, 90% of them. It's frightening. The solution to that won't come from a single source, because no one of those silo groups has all the skills or the funding to put it right. It needs to be multifaceted, and that's the same for PE and sport in schools. There shouldn't be protectionism about improving the lives of children, and I don't think it's just a job of teachers, it's a job of parents, it's a job of coaches, it's a job of society and the community to make an impact. And within that, external providers, in which I'll include the full gamut, national governing bodies, the community sports partnerships, county sports partnerships, youth sport trusts, and Compass, should all be playing a role. It shouldn't be any them or us. So Compass is an association for all the various external providers. Now, traditionally, it's been the public sector. The school has been responsible for developing the physical education, sport, and more recently, the health and well-being of its pupils. And the public sector traditionally have been doing it for hundreds of years. And for hundreds of years, it worked because most children were physically literate, quite fit, and were able to get on with things. It's only in the last 30, but in particular the last 20 years, that the health concern has become a ringing alarm bell. Because kids don't grow up running, jumping, throwing. You know, parkour now, we used to call it running away from the police. Very effective for developing those skills. The private sector certainly have been getting involved, and Andy's up next from Premier Sport, one of the biggest private sector contributor to school PE and sport. And the charity sector, we heard earlier from the Youth Sport Trust, they've had a go. More recently, social enterprises have got involved, and what they are in theory is a mix of all other three areas. But social enterprise, where the mission is more important than the profit, but unlike a charity, it isn't a man with a cap who spends the money then asks for some more. They're trying to be sustainable, self-perpetuating. So Compass is trying to give leadership and support to, I suppose, literally the thousands of people. I was at an event with Sue Campbell on Friday, and she went on about the man with his white van having his holiday in Barbados. I just wish there was that money available in the system. There isn't. But that's a very typical image, that these people are coming in and taking money from schools and producing rubbish. I think that's very respectful to the head teachers of schools, who are no mugs with their money. It's also trying to ensure a fit-for-purpose approach for external providers in terms of the quality, the training, and everything they do in terms of qualifications and continuing professional development. At that stage, I'll go on and let Andy come on, and then I'll come back at the end.
Okay, well, thank you, Graham. So, yeah, similar background to Graham in terms of being a sports performer as a footballer. Very lucky to receive a position at a very early age of 19, which he was working for JJB. JJB, Dave Whelan built a soccer dome in Wigan. It was 12 indoor soccer pitches. We had to fill it with children every single week. It was my job at that age to recruit coaches. On pitch 1, we had 5 and 6-year-old children. On pitch 12, we had the 12 and 11-year-old children. I could not put the coach with the 12 and 11-year-olds with the 5 and 6-year-olds and vice versa. It was always a challenge to look at the coaches and to find out, well, which coach can I put with what group? How they're suitably qualified. They can't work with that group. However, he's got his A licence, he's got his level 1, and it was always a competence-based programme. So that was my background, and I've been involved now with Premier Sport for 7 years. I have a very fortunate position where I visit over 100 primary schools per year. I think I've just stopped my car MOT. It was 28,000 miles I've done this year, which was up and down the country, going into primary schools, watching teachers deliver, working with head teachers, working with coaches to look at having an impact in working in schools and the role of a coach, their responsibility within them environments. At Premier Sport, we have been working and operating now for around 13 years. We employ over 500 coaches right across the country. I know some of the governing bodies in the room might not have that amount of coaches, but that's how much we recruit. And we've got teachers, we've got coaches that have studied for 4 years on their coaching degrees, various background, which we've just took on around 4 or 5 primary school teachers. And we've also got our leadership leaders and managers across the country that obviously come from these backgrounds as well. We're committed, as it says there, responsibility. We're committed as a provider to ensure that children are receiving the best possible service and the schools are getting the best what they can. Graham's just identified the sort of key purpose of Compass. And it's to ensure as responsible provider we have a purpose between staffing, fit for purpose staff and fit for purpose doing fit for purpose roles. That's what we're about. What do we do to make sure we do that? So over the next 10 to 15 minutes, I just want to talk a little bit about the relevant qualifications, the support we do, not just support for coaches, but the support for leaders and managers and how they are working with schools and advising and working together to get the best possible programme. But as you've already identified throughout the morning so far, we're a very, very small part of this jigsaw, very small. And it can be quite frustrating as the private provider when you do hear these stories and that, you know, a lot of the work that we're doing almost gets tarnished with a bad brush. And we want to make sure that, you know, we are quality, we are responsible. And it, you know, coming together is a beginning, keeping together is progress, working together is success. That's what we want. So, what is it we want to achieve? That's our mantra, inspiring young people through PE and sport. If I was to ask you as a coach, what's your role? And we're going to come on to that in a second, but that's what we want, through being the key word, through the sport, through the vehicle, through football, through basketball, whatever it is, that's what we want to achieve. But we've got to do that for our coaches. I think earlier on I did write it down, I've not got it. You know, it's about people. It's about people you deploy. It's about that adult working in a school with the children, with the teachers, and it's giving them the enthusiasm to motivate them, to be able to work with them. And what does that result in? Well, we want children who are engaged, receiving the best possible service they can, and making progress. That's what we want. And I don't know, you as coaches in the room, if I was to say to you, you know, what's your promise? Are you going to teach children this week? What's going to be? And I'll throw it out there. We'll have a discussion with the person next to you. What is your promise? If I say you're going to promise to do this for the children, what is it going to be? I'll give you two minutes just to talk to somebody next to you. What would be your promise to your children that you're working with this week as a coach? What are you going to promise them? Okay. Sorry to stop you, but I know I am conscious of the time. So I don't know, guys on this table here, and I know we've got a couple of coaches who's been on my table today. What would be your promise? Okay, enjoyment. Linda, your table? Leading. So as role models, as a male in a primary school, that's often something that comes up. Enjoyment. But we have a philosophy at Premier Sport, the coaches, and you know that you only get fun. Sport's fun, you can't say it, but you only get fun if activity and achievement meet. So it's really important that we focus on achievement. And I've put a diagram there in terms of the depths we go in terms of recruiting coaches. It's not just your man with a bag of balls on the white van who just turns up. Well, I wish it was. It'd be a lot easier if people were fit for purpose and you could deploy them the way that. But as an external provider, you've got to make sure that you deploy fit for purpose coaches. The diagram there just shows you the depth that we go into. You know, that they, as a coach, they can infuse people, they can motivate them. They have the confidence to communicate effectively with adults. And as a semi-professional footballer currently, who had a small taste of management last year, unfortunately wasn't the best experience, but there you go. When you walk onto the back of the team bus, and half the team I had were coaches, football coaches, come through their apprenticeship program as a footballer, and they lack the ability as young adults to hold a communication, to hold a conversation. This is what I see when I get on the bus. Nodding heads, earphones in, no communicating between us. You go out for a meal, people send text messages across the table. It's such a different barrier. And what the message I'm getting today is that as you as coaches, I don't know what message you're getting in the room, but I'm certainly getting that. You've got more to do. You've got a lot more to do now than just go in and deliver the sport or deliver the activities. You've got more responsibilities. So it's when you're being deployed then, it's really, really important that something like this is followed. Compliance, certification. Are you legal to go in and do your job? We've got to check that. We've got to do it online. You can't go into school now without a photo ID, without a DBS, without having your certificates on you. We'll create a profile for you so that your CPD can be tracked. We don't just then deploy and go, there you go. You need to learn the environment that you're in. I've never come across a school that's the same. They're all different. Different leaders, different teachers, different children, different areas, different backgrounds. So the coach needs to understand what he's up against or she's up against. What's the ethos? Agree the impact. Because it's about collaboration. It's about working together. And again, another diagram, highly skilled workforce. And it's once they're deployed, you watch them, you work with them, you observe them. You make sure they're doing what they should be doing, and you feed back. And the most important part then is what happens next. You're observed, but what are you going to do to make sure? What qualifications, what training are you going to go through? And again, that's something that through Premier Sport and through Compass, we want to accredit. We want to accredit training to make sure that all the training that I've done with the coaches and my team do with the coaches, it's all internal CPD. How do we make that accredited? Because it does work. And just to give you an example, and funny enough, I presented this 3.5 years ago. Strategically, as an organisation, we've been working on this. It's not just because Sport Premium's come along and we want a taste of it as a private organisation. It's so far off that. It's about quality. It's about fit-for-purpose coaches. That's the message I'm getting. So, entry-level coach will be doing these relevant qualifications through observation, through support. They will then move up to an established level, and so on. And we've also created pathways into Premier Graduate. There's 12 coaching degrees, or sports degrees currently, that cover coaching within them. I'm yet to find a degree that is fit for purpose. So, it's everybody's aim, and I'm going to pass you back to Graham in a second, who's going to finish our presentation. But it's everyone's aim to ensure that PE and school sport, physical activity opportunities are crucial for our children. Tougher assessment for Ofsted will ensure that not just schools but providers, extracurricular, curricular will be looked at. We need to make sure everything's doing what we say we're doing. But as coaches, think about your promise you've just made. Do you have it in you to engage the children you work with? It's about achievement. It's not just about activities. And it's really focusing on what the end goal is. Because that's what we do. And that's what the focus is we compass. So thank you for the time. And I'm going to pass you on to Graham, who will finish the slide.
Okay, thanks, Andy. Evolve, a social impact company. We're a social enterprise. And several years ago, we set about overcoming those challenges of children growing up in the digital age. I'm a bit of a serial innovator. I'm an unreasonable person. If I don't think something's good, I try and change it to the best of my ability, or at least improve it. And I think physical education, in particular as a subject, has for far too long been led by apologists for what is in fact the best subject on the school curriculum. And as the challenges towards health and social development get greater, its position as the best subject should be underlined. But never has PE been more relevant and more vital. We came up with Project Hero. Health engagement, real outcomes. It's an innovative programme. We were on the preventative side, Paul, because even if you're going to segment off those at the acute end who need a specialist intervention, because the rising inactivity and obesity levels keep going up, at some stage you've got to try and that preventative. And one thing that is worth mentioning to everyone in the room, that if you were to add up the cost to the NHS of smoking, alcohol abuse and obesity, they don't match the costs to basic inactivity. Just basic inactivity among the human race is more damaging than smoking, alcohol abuse and obesity combined. Basic physical activity, not exercise, not fitness training, not elite performance, general activity of a physical nature. We wanted to build in a program that affected most of those silos, and we deliver them by what we call a health mentor. They're not a coach, they're not a PE teacher, they're not a teaching assistant. It's a new dimension to school staffing. We do extensive vocational training for them. It's nice if they got an NGB award, but at the end of the day, everything's a bit of paper. It's the person that matters, not the piece of paper. And we've recently hired Janine Beecher, who was the City and Guilds Lead for Sport and then International Business. She's our Director of Education. We are very, very serious on the training side. The health mentors are specially recruited and trained. We believe that one of the most simple things primary schools could do to get children more active is to address the gender imbalance. 25% of primary schools don't have a single male member of staff. The rest are probably 90% plus female. Where are the role models for young boys? A very fierce head teacher I deal with, who's also an Ofsted inspector, and I please don't want to offend any person in this room, but this is what she told me. She said, Graham, you're pussyfooting around the need for a young, fit male model. Look at me, I'm a woman, a middle-aged woman in a cardigan, and you expect me to inspire young boys to be active when over here you've got a young 25-year-old sports coach. They will follow him everywhere. And I think that simple gender imbalance is an area. And the other thing is that these are madly enthusiastic, active sports people. They live and breathe what we're trying to project. And it's much easier to use them to try and change somebody. And the last thing about health mentors, we embed them in the schools. They're there all day. 8 o'clock start, maybe with breakfast, wake and shake. Sometimes they're there at the end doing the after-school club. They're in there alongside the staff. The head teacher gives them a 3-outcome agenda to get on with, and they're embedded in the schools. They're not somebody who comes in and goes out and comes in, and they're there. One of the most effective things they do is stand by the salad bar at lunchtime. Don't say anything, they just stand there, and the kids are showing, look, so. We believe that physical engagement and active learning is the best way to engage children, because you can see if they're engaged or not. If they're standing still or sitting down, they're probably not engaged. Get them moving. We do a range of programs, but our staff are equally happy in the classroom. So they win some kudos out on the playing field or in the sports hall. They take that into the classroom, whether it's with guided reading or phonics. Various things. We have a partnership with Mathletics, which is like taking computer gaming into the maths arena, but we're trying to make it more active. And we've recently worked with a group to do a literate and numeracy version of tag rugby. We mentor children. We use pause button therapy, which is a new system. And we run a lot of holiday courses that are not sport specific, they're child specific. We were only at the start trying to combat inactivity and obesity. So when we started to get feedback like this from Ofsted, we were a bit confused, because we weren't aiming at that stage to highlight support for vulnerable children. We certainly weren't aiming at that stage at basic literacy and numeracy. But that's what Ofsted said we were doing. So we changed what we're doing a little bit. Return to Compass now, and you've seen between Premier Sport, a big private franchise really leading that area of the industry, and you've heard from a much smaller social enterprise. What about Compass itself? Well, it continues to grow because more people join. There are various benefits, insurance cover, various other things. It's earning the niche role that external providers have in school. Head teachers know what's best for their children. If it's good, they will bring it in. If it's not good, they will kick it out. They're not being hoodwinked by commercial providers stealing money and rushing off to Barbados. It doesn't work that way. Compass is doing its best to align with the traditional players in this area. It understands that coaches will work better with teachers, and it certainly understands that teachers can work better with coaches. It helps create jobs for young coaches coming through, and it contributes to its part in getting children to grow more active and to grow more healthy. When we talk about the window of opportunity that Sports Premium opens up, Compass is part of that opportunity. Thank you.
Sorry, Graham, just to finish. You've heard a lot of programmes this morning, different strategies for delivering as a coach. You've got your 5C, which is fantastic, like David was telling us about. But that's what we're trying to achieve with Compass. We're trying to achieve, so it's support for coaches, so that you, like going back to my slide, is fit for purpose. You're in a safe environment. You're in a confident, there's something else you referred to before, a confident environment. So as a coach, you can feel confident that you could challenge a teacher. How many coaches do you feel confident that you can work alongside a teacher? Are you going to be telling a teacher, well, put your tracksuit on, put your trainers on? And that's what we want to do with Compass, is really, really establish that support, that network, and share some of the really good practice that as private providers or social enterprise we do.
Thanks, Andy and Graham. Now, to give you some breathing space, to pose your questions, and for goodness sake, do stick your hands up, and Shamwaz will come round with a microphone for you. But we've had a number of questions on Twitter. One from Oxfordshire Sport links your session with Paul's previous session. How do we, and in fact specifically thinking about you as private coaching providers, you talked about both the induction and the CPD. how do you ensure that coaches understand and cater for obese children?
Well, I think from a personal point of view, from Premier Sports, it's that collaboration, again, going back to working with schools, working with teachers to say, well, how do we combat this? How do we work together? Because, you know, to be real about it, you will go into a school, a class of 30 children, you may have 2 children in that class who are obese. As a coach, the challenge is, well, how do you then structure your activities? How do you differentiate and include everybody, including the 2 obese children, to have an impact? Well, that just doesn't happen by the coach or by the provider. It's really important that the school have an input there to say, well, do we do something specific to what Paul did before? So,
from my point of view, I mean, has anyone tried to snaffle you up, Paul, and get your advice? Because I would hope that Compass would say to you, can you help us in that area? You're the expert in that area. How would you contribute? Yeah, that would be my simple answer there. We have an expert, for goodness sake, get him on board and listen to him.
Interestingly, we've had a partial response to that question from somebody else from Schools Need Me, where they raised the solution of engaging with the parents in particular as well. And Andy, inevitably, your comment that you've not yet seen a fit-for-purpose coaching degree has caused a flurry of tweets. And so I think if I rephrase the one from, and I hope I've got your name right, John Stuskowski, could you expand on that and what specifically is missing from the existing degrees, which you would...
Yeah, it's a frustration that as working with over 500 coaches throughout the country and a turnover of, you know, hundreds of coaches who come through that, we're talking about fit-for-purpose staff, and if they come with a coaching degree, which we just recently, you know, experienced, and you send them into this environment of 30 children within a school, of a class with a teacher, there's so many competencies just not there in that. Vocationally, you just find that there is something missing, and it's I suppose the same in teacher education. It's the 6 hours of delivery in that curricular or extracurricular environment. And there's some competencies that we do feel that we have to catch up on.
So that's really highlighting the need for coaches and teachers to work together. Yeah. Okay. Fine. Shamas, our first question from the audience. Vicky.
It's related to that, and I'll try and flip it positively as one of those 12 coaching degrees sat here, unfortunately for you, probably. Bad luck that was, having one here. Yeah, but flipping it positively, I think it's really important to take on board that point and understand that within an academic setting, that's exactly what it is. It's an academic programme, but we work very hard to match to Compass, to match to the sports partnership outlines, and actually, on a positive note, I think across the board, and almost as an awareness raising, is actually higher education institutions to be able to help the whole population put a lot of this stuff into practice are very keen to do so. And I suppose there's almost an element of this is a great opportunity to make providers more aware of them as a resource, and actually that can help upskill them to make your job easier on the ground. But also, I spend a lot of time trying to go out and find things. Was actually, it'd be great if providers came to HE as well and actually understood that they're there as a population to really help and really add something to this and help implement that. Because there is an employability agenda as well as an academic agenda, and actually I think we should be working a little bit smarter collectively as a whole organisation, HE, FE, your schools. Otherwise we're coming to a breaking point after school, and actually I think we probably could all work together. So I suppose an element of positivity to say come to HE institutions as well and see how we can all work together, because I think there's definitely skill sets across the board that we can monopolise on really and use.
So your question, Vicky, is really a rhetorical one, is how can we all work more closely together?
Yeah.
And I think,
do you want to respond?
Yeah, thanks for clarifying it really, and it's not meant to come away in the way I suppose some people have taken it, in that it's just a frustration that you do get a lot of people who come through, you know, the various institutes and still lack that competence to be able to work with we've certainly, 4, 5 year children who are of that age range, and they do need that development of which we have to do. We have to keep this infrastructure, observing feedback, CPD, observe, and that's what we do at Premier Sport. That's what we're trying to do with Compass. So yeah, we're open to working with.
Could I just chip in on that? But you mentioned there that it's a theoretical degree, it's an academic degree. I think we got too theoretical with physical education. The whole point about it, it's physical, it's doing stuff, it's a practical subject. And if anyone comes out with any sort of sport or PE qualification, we've just hired a young lad, a fantastic young man, got a sports science degree. We're thinking, great, he'd just go straight in. He said, I never did one practical session in the 3 years. Now, that can't be right. It's all about the physical side, whether it's skill learning, game playing, physical literacy, physical activity, physical fitness. You can't take the physical out of PE. It's just impossible. It's not PE anymore.
I'm sure there are parallels there with all sorts of other industry sectors where employers in those sectors feel perhaps there's a shortcoming.
We've identified, with David, he's had the 5 Cs. That should be embedded within this. Rugby Union are embedding it, and then the FA, it's again this difference between models and expectations of coaches being deployed through Compass. We're trying to get that, whether that be working with HE.
Okay. We've got time for one last question from Paul Gately.
I actually want to back up that comment, and in a sense with the working with obese children, it's even more difficult. So I agree that getting the right competencies, so we've got a workforce of about 200 people who are out delivering programs on a weekly basis, and you're absolutely right, we are not getting the right coaches in with the right skills in to be able to work with those obese children. And I work as an academic at a university as well, and I think they need to move a long way. And you're right, the agenda of employability is key, but actually there's other agendas in higher education at the moment, which is about just survival. And for the next few years, I think that's going to be the key, and we will not see innovation for some time. And I suppose part of my comment around the obesity agenda was, if we are to tackle obesity at the sharp end, we need a pathway from generic sports, which is, you were rightly asked, from generic activity into more specialist programs for those that are more vulnerable. That's the comment I was trying to make in my presentation, not that within a class you need to just take out the 2 obese kids and do an individual session for them. They need to be integrated, but there's a heck of a long way, because most of the people that are delivering those sessions don't have the core competencies to engage those kids properly. So I fully agree with those statements.
Could I just add one sentence and I will shut up? If we don't get this right, and we don't get it right soon, the NHS will be bankrupt. The consequences of inactivity and obesity on their own in the next 10 to 15 years could see the end of the NHS, because it will be financially exposed. And if it's not the people in this room to set about that task along with their other stuff, no one else is doing it.
It's inevitable that a session like today will raise as many questions as to which there are no easy answers. And that's important too, to raise awareness right across the coaching community. And certainly this particular issue, which is one that's going to be at the heart of our work over the next few years. And you'll be hearing about that in due course, I think. It's one quick tweet before we break, again from Schools Need Me, just reinforcing the point that the problems for coaches going into schools are exactly the same as for supply teachers going in. Working with a new class is always going to be a challenge.